Underneath the arena, the contestants were all busy getting ready for the fighting event. The weapons and armor they had hidden until now were all out on full display. On top of this, the participants themselves did not know who they were going up against. Students for this event were also able to use whatever equipment they owned. It didn't matter whether one person had higher gear than the other. It was all about individual strength rather than skill. The focus was to show how they would compete in the real world. Above, there were 10 platforms for there to be 10 fights happening simultaneously at the same time. The fighting event was one of the most significant events, so they needed not to have too much going on at the same time. Their goal was to allow the students to display their powers, and if all the students were to fight at the same time, it would be impossible to keep track of them all. Many factions and important members were watching this event, looking for their next recruits. Before going onto the stage, each of their stage names would be announced, allowing them to know who they were watching and something to remember the students by. All of the students who were in the fighting event were split into groups of 10. This meant on the first day, half of them would be eliminated. Nate continued to look around and eventually spotted Larry. "Looks like we won't be facing each other in the first round. That's good. Let me see how much you have improved before I fight you myself," he said. It wasn't set in stone, but Nate was pretty sure that the groups had indicated who would be going out together, and those in the same group would be facing each other. When he looked over to the group to his right, he could see not only Larry, but also the student who had the 2 guards, who had never left his side once, standing at the back. "I guess it's worth keeping an eye out on you as well," Nate said, still curious about why they never left his side. "We have something important to tell you," the guard whispered in Peter's ear. "Don't even think about surrendering or giving up the fight. If you do, you will be paying a visit straight back to the dungeon, and trust me, I can guarantee you don't want to go back there this time." Even with the man's threats, it didn't bother Peter too much. What he was far more concerned about was what they were planning to do. Were they going to just let him have a fair fight with one of the students here? It was clear now, after spending a whole day with the guards. With Quinn and the other's strength, there was no way for them to save him. He wasn't stupid. "Whatever they plan to do, I won't let them have it go their way," Peter thought, trying to make it as hard as possible. "All right, everyone, Group A, please start to make your way to the platform," a soldier ordered, and the first group, which had both Peter and Larry, started to make their way up to the stage. Nate started to rub his hands together in excitement. He couldn't wait to see what would happen. Inside the underground arena, they also had several screens, which allowed them to see what was going on above. He would have to observe from there. The anticipation of finally meeting the Blood Evolver was killing him. They had all entered the field as the crowd heavily cheered for them. The noise was so loud that it felt like the whole arena was vibrating slightly. Not everyone was here for recruitment, and it was clear some were here just to enjoy the show that would be put on. "It looks like Peter will be in the first batch," Logan said, watching from the top platform in his seat. "I wonder what they're thinking," Vorden asked. "Rather than worry about what they are thinking, I'm far more concerned with what Peter is thinking. He's a little unpredictable when it comes to situations like these," Logan replied. However, Fex was now sweating heavily. He crossed his arms and nervously tapped his foot away, staring at the screen. He was far more concerned about a bigger problem. Not being able to take it anymore, he had left his seat and walked over to the edge to look down at the arena. Seeing Peter on the screen had made him worry even more. "Oh no," Fex thought. The second he looked at his sister, he could tell from the expression on her face. She had discovered Peter. As soon as Peter had entered the arena and started to walk over to the platforms, in an instant she could smell that there was something different among them. Then, when they further split up, she finally had spotted who and where the smell was coming from. "I was meant to be the only one stationed at a military base. There were meant to be no others. Not only that, it's a subclass. Don't tell me." A worrying thought started to go through her head. It was clear that the subclass vampire was illegal. She would have been informed before coming otherwise. There was no doubt about it. The problem was who had created it. Was it her brother? If so, there might no longer be any way for her to save him anymore. After breaking so many rules, he would not get off with a light punishment. For now, unable to do anything in the middle of the tournament, all she could do was keep an eye on the illegal while continuing to judge her fight, since it looked like she wouldn't be judging the battle with the illegal. Underneath the large stone cylinders, 2 students stood on either side. The pillars were spread evenly throughout the arena, allowing the audience to see a fight no matter where they were, but they also had screens that would display the other matches, in case they were interested. Every so often, there were soldiers stationed in the crowd, and this included General Duke. The audience didn't think it was so strange, since it was a fighting tournament, but the reason for the high level of security was something else. "Is everyone ready? During the fight with the student known as Peter, everyone is to keep an eye. They could come out at any second," Duke ordered into his communicator. The soldiers were there in case of an attack from Pure. There were even more soldiers than the audience knew. Several members of the crowd were also disguised. Not knowing the importance of the member they had in question, they were also unclear about how much effort they would make to rescue him. There was also the possibility that they weren't even going to rescue him at all. The 4 leaders and Supreme Commander were here. Any rescue attempt would require their full power, and in all the years before, there had never been an attack on the event. However, there was one thing they were sure about, and that was the fact that they would be watching. Jack, sitting in his booth, was excited. He didn't expect anyone from Pure to come. That's why he wanted to put Peter up for the fight in the first place, so they could brutally see one of their own being beaten to death. By each of the pillars, there was an additional soldier down below. Their job was to catch anyone who would fall off the stage. As the first stage names were announced, the soldier below stomped his foot hard on the ground, and a smaller pillar raised the student onto the fighting platform. This was readily done as each of the students' names was being called. A cheer followed with each name, until eventually they had reached the last platform, Platform 10. The soldier stomped his foot, raising Larry Steele to the stage. "And on stage 10, introducing Octopuncher." Looking at the screen from underground, Nate was slightly confused by the name choice. "So you're not going to reveal your blood evolver in front of everyone, huh? But what kind of lame name is that?" The man then stomped his foot again, and a pillar rose from underneath Peter, allowing him to step onto the platform. "And next we have his opponent, Zombie P." When this name was called, there wasn't much of a reaction from the crowd in the arena. However, the students above and below ground were stunned, and Nate couldn't keep his jaw closed. As Peter's name was revealed to the audience, there seemed to be a strange reaction between a few people, and others started to notice this shift. The VR game that Peter played, Power Fighters, was very popular, and the user Zombie P had become a hot topic amongst players. However, there were a few important things to note. Not everyone who played the game visited the forums. Only those that truly enjoyed the game, like Nate and Sam, were a part of this group. Second of all, the servers that Peter played on were the military servers, meaning the only people who knew about Peter were the military students themselves. Still, the strange reaction caused by the students above started to spread like fire. When one or two would start to talk and murmur, others beside them would ask what was so interesting. "Is he Zombie P?" a student asked. "Maybe he's just a fan? Can someone explain to me who Zombie P is?" "Ah, you don't know. He's quite well known in the VR game Power Fighters." The students were busy sharing information and videos of Zombie P's performance in the game, and soon nearly every student now knew about Zombie P. However, those who were in Dell's class were confused, as the video clearly showed the person in the video had a regenerative ability, while the Peter they knew was an Earth user. Those that knew Peter couldn't believe the connection. It just didn't make any sense. Although Peter's information was being spread between the students, the same couldn't be said for the people in the arena. They had come from outside the military, and even though the game was popular on the outside, they didn't have access to the military servers and knew nothing of the name. This was the same for Jack and the others in the booth as well. While they all had their eyes spread, watching all the participants fighting, Jack was mainly focused and excited about the beatdown that Peter was about to receive. "Wait, you're friends with Zombie P?" Sam asked, shocked by what he had just found out. The others had told him they were mainly watching the fighting tournament because of Peter, but didn't explain much else. They didn't know that this type of reaction was going to happen. The fact that everyone was talking about Peter came as a surprise even to them. "Wait, can somebody please explain to me what is the big deal about Peter being called Zombie P?" Layla asked. "I guess I should explain this one since it's partly my fault," Logan said. "One day when I was busy doing my usual tinkering away at my workbench, Peter had decided to play the game, Unbeknownst to me, he was causing quite a stir in the online world, and had become infamous because of his powerful regenerative abilities. Logan was unable to go into further detail due to Sam being there, but there was quite a difference between Peter's ability in the game and the one out there. The game had managed to copy Peter's unique body structure. Rather than ability, it determined his body was what was causing the extraordinary healing. This was why it allowed him to use his abilities in the game, the same way Quinn could use his as well. But as Quinn was able to use his blood abilities with no drawback, Peter could use his regenerative abilities as well, making him nearly invisible in the game. In real life, this wasn't the case. Peter did have extraordinary healing abilities, but if he was pushed to the edge, he would no longer heal until he was fed. Let's hope True Dream isn't planning something stupid. Nate nearly exploded into excitement after hearing the user's name. Now he thought he understood why they were heavily guarding him. Noticing his watch's level showing a 1, there must have been something different about this person. Perhaps they didn't want the secret to be revealed. Either way, Nate was beyond excited. He was going to watch a match between two infamous people from the game, the Blood Evolver versus Zombie P. Ladies and gentlemen, the match will now begin. The buzzer had sounded, and the fight had now started on the 10 platforms. There was quite a mix to the sound of the buzzers going off. Some students charged in immediately, causing fireworks and sparks to fly as they battle, while others patiently circled the ring, waiting for the right chance to attack. Most of the attention was focused on the flashier matches, and didn't pay attention to much else. Silver, who was one of the referees of another match, had her mind focused somewhere else. I need to get this match over and done with as soon as possible. The two students she was watching were both female, and the two of them continued to circle each other, waiting for one of them to attack. Come on, Silver thought. At last, one of the female students swirled her hands around and blasted a hydro pump full of water. A strong stream of water came out from the palm of her hand and was heading straight for the other student. The distance was great between the two, and the other contestant was not worried about an attack like this. She would easily be able to avoid it. But then she noticed Silver walking around the edge of the ring. This was fine. As a ref, one needed to reposition themselves to stop the fight at any moment, just like a boxing match. For a second, though, the two of their eyes met. Distress was now heading towards her. Huh, what's this? I can't move. The student was shocked. She screamed at her body to jump out of the way, but it just wasn't listening to her for some reason. Am I that nervous? She thought. But it was now too late. The powerful stream of water had hit her right in the chest, causing her to be lifted off her feet and sent her flying through the air. She was now off the platform and was falling below, but soon she felt her back hit against the solid ground. Ah, I'm alive, she said, feeling her heart beating rapidly. When she stood up, she noticed she was on a makeshift pillar that was slowly descending back into the ground. The Earth soldier below had raised a new platform as soon as he saw her fall off the platform. We have our first winner, the announcer said. The female student was upset and was still confused about what had happened, but she was only a first-year student and put it down to the fact she must have been more nervous than she thought. Finally, now I can focus, Silver said. During the fight, when the student's eyes had met with hers, she had activated her daze power, freezing her for a moment. Her goal was to end the fight as quickly as possible, and it seemed to work. Now she could freely watch the illegals battle. That was a little strange, Owen said, sitting inside the booth still playing with his long hair. Did you notice something? Oscar, the Supreme Commander, asked. You didn't? It must have been my imagination then, he replied. It's quite hard to focus on one fight in particular when so many are going on, Mona Bree said. Many of them had already chosen to form the initial inspection, which they wanted to watch. From a glance at the equipment, it was usually easy to tell which students were stronger. Good equipment indicated they were strong enough to slay that beast in the first place. However, this wasn't always the case, as some received more support from their family members than others. On the other hand, Owen was only interested in one person, and that was Silver, and this was the reason he had paid attention to their fight. While Jack had his pure attention focused on one fight, it looked like something interesting was going on that particular platform. When the fight had started, Larry immediately had gotten into a fighting stance. He had his gauntlets and full beast gear on. Everything seemed to be at the intermediate level, and looking at him reminded him a little bit of Quinn. Although as soon as he got in a wide fighting stance, that changed, as Quinn usually fought more freely, adapting as he went along. Larry waited and waited for Peter to do something until eventually Peter raised his hand in the air. "I forfeit from the match," he said. Peter didn't care about this match, and fighting meant there was a chance to reveal himself and Quinn. Originally, he wanted to fight, but thought this was for the best, even if he was to die. The words had been spoken loud and clear, and Peter even raised his hand to signal this to the ref. Even so, the ref stood there in silence. It was as if he had never even heard the words in the first place. "I said I forfeit!" Peter shouted. There were no mics on the students, and the platforms, along with the noise from the crowd, were far too loud and far for anybody to hear. Seeing this, Jack started to giggle inwardly to himself. "You think you can just give up? No. No matter what you do, you can't run away from this fight. The whole audience and that disgusting organization of yours are going to see you be beaten till you can no longer move in front of everyone." The other matches ended much earlier than anticipated. The participants were rapidly being announced as winners. This was half expected from the first group, as they were all composed of first-year students. The event was set up this way so the stronger first-year students would proceed and have a better chance of fighting against the second-year students in the later rounds. Between the first-year students, there was quite an immense power and skill gap. This gap would mostly be the case on the first day, as the weaker students were thinned out. This way, the fights that were to be shown later on through the week wouldn't be so quick to end. The fighting event seemed to be drawing to a close, as there were only 3 platforms with fights still going on, one of these being Peter's. "So this is your grand plan? A setup?" Peter thought. The tournament had to be rigged from the beginning. The judge not replying was an indicator he was working for Jack, and his job was to make it so Peter was unable to surrender or forfeit no matter what. "Is the student working for Jack as well?" It was now hard for Peter to tell who was working for Jack and who wasn't. If he was able to set it up so, all of these things felt there was a good chance the student, the ref, and the soldier below who was meant to catch him were in on the whole plan as well. "There is another way?" Peter said as he looked at the edge of the arena. But if his suspicions were correct and the man below also worked for Jack, there was no way the man would try to catch him. From this height, his legs would shatter and would have to be regenerated on the spot, revealing his powers. If his powers were going to be revealed one way or another, he would rather have done it fighting instead. Larry was tired of waiting and finally decided to charge in. As he rushed forward, he made a loud war cry and banged his 2 gauntlets fists together. If he could, Peter would have liked to win this fight without showing his regeneration abilities. He needed to be careful and figure out just what his opponent's ability was, especially since he was a level 6 ability user. Making sure not to stay too close to the edge, Peter decided to also come forward. Larry had beast gear on that was also enhancing his speed, while Peter wore nothing. Still, he managed to match his speed, and the 2 of them met dead straight in the center. A fist was thrown, and Peter moved his head out of the way, avoiding it by a few inches as the strike went past his face. The attack was powerful, and the air around it had caused his hair to move. From Larry's other hand, a wide swing was thrown. This time Peter responded by duking underneath it. "Your friend is good at dodging at least," Sam said. From his experience, although those blows looked wild, they still came out at a good speed and with full commitment. It was clear with the first few punches that Larry was not the blood evolver. There was no finesse in the punches, just raw power. Still, if the blows connected, it was also clear they would do quite a bit of damage. Fex continued to watch the fight nervously. If he was right in guessing that Peter was created by Quinn and Peter was a white, it meant Peter in terms of stats was just as good as Quinn. The longer the fight went on, the more chances Silver found out, if she didn't know already. After dodging a few more punches, Peter was still wondering just when Larry was going to use his ability. He didn't want to make the first move until he had uncovered this secret. Another 2 swings from the side came one after another, but then suddenly Peter felt something grab him around the waist, and then something else held him tightly around the legs. Looking down, he could see what had latched onto him. A set of arms had grabbed him by the legs, and another set by his biceps. while the other two were where they should have been in the usual place. Right now, all the other fights had finished, as it took a while before Peter's officially got going, which meant all screens were on him, and everyone could see him being lifted in the air by 4 arms. "Ha ha, this is perfect," Jack said. "What perfect timing for everyone to see what is about to happen." The others in the room thought Jack was a little too happy watching the students fight. Apart from Oscar, the others never really got on well with Jack in the first place. Looking down at the arms, Peter remained calm as usual. He no longer feared death. Maybe this was because he was already dead. He then started to look at the arms closely and started to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Suddenly, Peter began to chuckle to himself. "What's so funny?" Larry said, annoyed, and also a little concerned when he felt like he had his opponent trapped. Most of the beast gear that he had on had a unique trait to enhance one's strength. This was perfect for Larry and his ability to grow extra limbs, which meant he had more power than the average person in each of his arms. "I never knew I was fighting with an idiot. Was your name Octopuncher? Shouldn't you have 8 arms and not 6? Peter asked. For a moment, Larry stood there still, and soon he began to realize his mistake. His cheeks started to turn bright red, and his face felt hot. He didn't have a stage name before coming today, and when they had asked him, he thought of the best thing he could come up with at the time. "Arr!" he screamed. "I'll kill you!" Continuing to hold Peter in place with his other arms, he pulled back both his fist and punched Peter directly in the ribs. A cracking sound was heard, and the bones moving and fracturing could be felt in Larry's knuckles. Peter's body reacted to the attack, and the expression on his face changed as the air was punched out of him, but no screams were heard and no pain was felt. However, Larry was too angry to even realize this and continued to punch Peter repeatedly. After breaking his ribs, he went on to move his body around and hit his forearms, and lifted him to beat his legs. The whole audience was able to see the one-sided match on the screen. "This is not the bloody Volver," Nate said, disappointed, as he clicked his tongue and looked away from the screen. The man he was watching was nothing more than a wild beast. The others continued to watch and were wondering why the referee hadn't stopped the match yet. They could see him standing there clearly, watching such a one-sided fight, but did nothing to interfere. Some of the other referees had decided to stop fights before it had even gotten to this stage. In the end, it was up to the ref in the ring to determine when to stop the fight. They had information the others didn't know, such as student abilities, in case it was all part of the plan. "Don't you think the match should be stopped soon?" Layla asked. "If you were to ask me, I think that ref is a little dirty," Vorden replied. Finally, the punching rampage had stopped, and he allowed Peter to fall to the ground, retracting his arms back into his body. When Peter fell, the bones in his shins were now shattered. There was no attempt to lift himself, as he couldn't even stand up. He just laid there, having fallen to the ground. At this point, Larry was already walking away. "The match is over," Larry said to the ref. Although many in the arena thought the match was over, including the ones in the booth. The opinions of many of the students were different, including Sam. "Well, if he's the real Zombie P, then the match has only just begun," said Sam. It had only been a short time, less than a minute had passed, and Peter's legs had already healed. He stood up from the floor slowly, as his arms and ribs were still under repair. His body was twisting and turning in positions impossible if one's bones weren't broken, and everything slowly started coming back into place. Finally, Peter was once again back to his usual self. "Well, it turns out one person didn't disappoint me," said Nate. "You are the real Zombie P." Peter moved his neck from side to side, making sure everything worked as normal. "Well, now my ability was revealed to everyone anyway," Peter said. If Peter was to allow himself to take another beating like that, then after regenerating once more, there was a high chance he would need to eat human flesh again. Although they knew this secret of his, they didn't know the whole part, and eating flesh was a bigger problem than the first one. Now his secret was out, he had no choice. He needed to fight back, to not give out any other information to them. "I like it better this way," he said with a smile.
Hi, Quinn here. Wondering what happens next? If you want to jump the queue and unleash all episodes, click on the link here and install the Pocket FM app.